Hello, everyone. Welcome to our amazing panel, our Writing Paths workshop, where we will be discussing the pros and cons to traditional publishing and self-publishing. My name is Alyssa. I am the program deputy at The Word. I am also a children's book author and your host for today's event. The Word is a nonprofit organization whose mission is storytelling for collective abundance. We center authentic storytelling for BIPOC, LGBTQIA2S+, neurodiverse, and disabled communities. Support and connect writers, publishers, booksellers, and readers. We have a little bit of something for everyone that want to explore and build collective models for the literacy ecosystem and hold space for community. Our main programs include the Editor Writer Program, our Margins Literary Conference and Book Festival, and our Margins Bookselling Month initiative, which also includes our BIPOC Bookseller Award. The program you are a part of today is our Writing Paths workshop, where we do free workshop conversations about how the industry works. Thank you all for saying hello in the chat. Keep that energy up. We really greatly appreciate it. Today, we will be discussing the pros and cons of traditional publishing, and we're going to talk about the differences, the similarities, the challenges, the growing pains, the victories, and everything in between. So please drop your questions in the chat as we go along. I have the pleasure of introducing our amazing panelists. Let's bring them on stage. Our amazing panelists meet Acamea Deadwiler, Leslye Penelope, and Luz Maria Mack. Acamea Deadwiler received critical acclaim from Publishers Weekly, which they are super critical, for her book, Single That. She is an accomplished writer who has appeared on the Fox television network talk show More, a former top contributor for Yahoo, and a frequent contributor to Mind, Body, Green. Acamea has been featured in the New York Post, Cosmopolitan, Bustle, Bellevue Literary Review, and Beyond Words Literary Magazine. She is also a TEDx speaker. Woo, girl, I'm so ready to hear all about that. Then we have Leslye Penelope, has been writing since she could hold a pen and loves getting lost in the words in her head. She is an award-winning fantasy and paranormal romance author. Her novel, Song and Blood of Stone, was chosen on one of Times Magazine 100 Best Fantasy Books of all time. Woo! Equally left and right brain, she studied filmmaking and computer science in college and sometimes dreams in HTML. She hosts the My Imaginary Friends podcast and lives in Maryland with her furry dependents. And then we have Luz Maria Mack, who is a dear friend of mine. She is a Dominican children's book writer who resides in the vibrant South Bronx. She was born in Villamela, Dominican Republic, and immigrated to the US as a young child with her family. She holds a master's in public administration from Metropolitan College of New York with a wealth of experience in hospital and nonprofit spaces. She is known for writing stories, celebrating culture and language while empowering children. Her inspiration comes from her husband and 3 beautiful children. In October 2020, Mac won the Best Animated Short Film at Bridge Fest. And in March 2021, her book Pequeña María, Descubre su baile, was featured in PBS Chat and Learn program. She also collaborated with the Disney Storytime art team to co-write The Family is Everything Disney Encanto picture book. Mac's latest book, The Secret of the Plátano, was released September 2022, and became a #1 new release on Amazon. in Children's Central and South America books. It also received the Best Children's Picture Book of 2023 by the Children's Book Committee of Bank Street College of Education. Whew, you ladies have my tongue twisting with all of your amazing accomplishments. This is great. So now that I have read your amazing bios, feel free to share with us what drew you to writing and specifically publishing, because you can be interested in writing and you can write for yourself, write in your journal, write in your diary, but what drew you specifically to publishing? And I will hand the mic off to Leslye first.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Like my bio says, I've always been a writer. So I was in literary magazines in high school and college. I was always scribbling, trying to get published in those little ways. I didn't think that I could ever write a novel, really, until I was definitely, well into adulthood. And so what got me thinking about publishing was just that I had read so much. I loved books so much, and I kind of just wanted to be a part of that. And I feel like everybody has a story to tell. And so the books that were so important to me, the books that changed my life, like I was like, is there any chance I could do that for someone else? I just wanted to put something into the world. And like, as a creative person, like I studied film, and I was making films and trying to just put creativity and art in the world and uplift people. And I felt like I could do that with my books and the stories that I had to tell also. So I started as a self-publisher. I started, having that confidence or insanity, whatever it is, to believe that someone else should be reading this thing that I wrote, and going through all the steps to make that a reality.
Love that. And I personally know Lou, so I know you also got started self-publishing. Anything you'd want to share?
Yeah. By the way, thank you for having me here, and thank you for being in the space with these beautiful women who accomplished so much. And just like Leslye said, I was really drawn into writing, but like her, like she shared that she didn't think she could write a book. I had no clue I was going to become a writer. I would just scribble little notes. I would journal, and my inspiration. And I know we had these chats. It came from my daughter. My daughter's, when she was 3 years old, she's half African American, half Dominican. She was accepted into this Upper West Side school where it's a predominantly white culture, and she was the only child that was that looked like me and looked like us. And I didn't know how alarming that could be for a young child, because I worked so hard to get her into that school. So when she asked me to dye her hair blonde, I joke saying every woman wants to be a blonde, but at 3 it was like a little too young. And I think like the part that really triggered me was when I had a conversation with one of her teachers. She said, there's no the way you could help Chloe feel beautiful is just showing her pictures of you as a child, your family. And that's really what made me start storytelling. And then when I tried looking for books that talk about the African American experience, the Hispanic experience, the Caribbean experience, I just didn't see anything. And we're talking about, I want to say 2014, 2015. And then when I started doing my research and saw the numbers, we were only like a small fraction. Like we were just a tiny percent. So self-publishing became more of my route to creating this story, because how can I tell publishers why it was so important for kids to see themselves when we weren't even given a seat and an opportunity? Because I did pitch, but they didn't get it. And that was like the resounding response I received. So when I wrote my book and I saw what it did to my daughter, she started loving her ebony hair. She started loving wearing her afro. She started loving her mestizo skin. And that's all I wanted to do. To me, like that was the goal. I had no idea it was going to lead me to here.
Love that. Acamea?
That's really interesting. What drew me to publishing was the nature of what I was writing about. So I started writing more as a release for myself, like writing about trauma and healing and things like that. And I was just like, other people could benefit from this as well. So that's what led me to think I should start putting my work out there into the world. I actually started as a sports writer. I was covering the Chicago Bulls for Yahoo Sports. So that was my foray into writing, and then when I started to write about these heavier, more, topics about the human experience, I was like, this could actually benefit other people. And that led me to, wanting to publish. And I started with self-publishing like the other two ladies. It's a way. That's what I love about, today's world. No one can tell you what to create. No one can tell you what you can put out there because of these avenues where you can publish things yourself. I think there's drawbacks to that because the very first thing I published, I would be like mortified if someone read it today. Just because it wasn't very good. When I go back and read it, it's kind of cringeworthy. So that was kind of my practice writing that probably shouldn't have been out into the world. But I love that we have that option to where no one can tell you this isn't going out. Like you can choose to do it yourself.
Wow. And the sports writing community is also an extremely like competitive community, predominantly white male. I have friends that are in that space and also adjacent to that space. And the fact that you started there just speaks a lot to your like grit and your resilience, because it is not easy being in that space. So, hats off to you for sure.
Yeah, it's brutal. The commenter people are passionate about sports, so commenters are brutal. And then also just being a woman in the space, if I call a basketball player to interview him, it turns into you trying to take me on a date. And I'm just like, so you have to deal with those kinds of things. So yeah, it was a lot, but I learned a lot and grew a lot in that space.
And that's what it's about, right? It's about growing, it's about learning. So thank you for sharing that, learn more fun things about all of you. That's great. And so it sounds like most of you started off with self-publishing and then transitioned to traditional publishing. Can you speak on some of the like key similarities between the industries on like your experience in trying both? Because there's a lot of differences and we're always like kind of pulling them apart as like polar opposites. But I think there's more things that they have in common. Anyone could take the question first.
For me, I was trying to make my first books, indistinguishable from traditionally published books. So I was trying to go through as much of the same process as I could. So I researched the editing. So I did, had a developmental editor help me with the content and the story and going through a couple of rounds of that. And then copy edits and then proofreading. And so trying to go through the, make sure because it's my very first book, I wanted it to be good. I wanted to make sure it was edited and people wasn't full of typos. Like, the stigma of self-publishing is that it's low quality. And then all through that process, which took like a year and a half, I was researching cover designers too. And so like I had criteria for my cover designers. I wanted them to have been, I found one who had worked with a traditional publisher and then gone out on his own. So he understood just how it works and what they're looking for. Your cover is an advertisement for your book, but it's not supposed to be art. It's not supposed to be like the most creative, unique thing ever. It's supposed to be like all the other covers, but different because it's communicating what you're going to get inside, at least for genre fiction, which I was writing. My first 4 novels are fantasy. And so, finding a really good cover designer and then all the other research. So the steps, like, it can be very different, but for me, I wanted it to be the same. I wanted to match it to the best of my like budget ability and the best of my knowledge and all of that. And then we're going to talk about budgets later. But, and then, marketing, it's very similar for what I do for my traditionally published books and my self-published books to this day. I'm still have to get out there, find the readers, talk about it. There's kind of a myth that the publisher is going to do all that for you. And maybe once upon a time they did, but these days you're still out there, you're still, marketing, you're still doing all that stuff. Some people buy ads. I don't do that for my ad stuff, but so there's a lot of, there's a lot of overlap in what you're going to do for self and trad.
I took the same approach with my most recently published book, the one that was critically acclaimed by Publishers Weekly. That was actually self-published. Thank you. That was actually self-published, but I took the same approach as Leslye. I hired professional editors, beta readers, developmental, editors, cover designers, because I wanted it to be indistinguishable. I didn't want you to look at it and know instantly, oh, this is a self-published book. I wanted it to be able to sit next to traditionally published books and stand up to that standard, because that is, one of the issues in the self-publishing industry. So I took the same approach. I'm invested. It's a lot of self-investment, if you're going to self-publish. That's probably the biggest difference. A lot of personal financial investment. If you want to do all of those things, if you want to make sure it's professional and it's up to the standard, you have to hire these experts to make sure it's up to par. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest differences, is that you're footing the bill for everything. How much goes into it depends solely on how much you're willing to put into it.
Love that.
I'm a little shy to say this, but my first book was really much a DEY project. I didn't think I was going to be an author, and it was mostly because I wanted to. It really took place because story time started at home at nighttime by me telling my daughter stories about my family, and it was simple things about me climbing mango trees, to chasing butterflies, to doing things. So I had no experience in this space, and for me to claim I had that experience would be a lie. So I really learned by trial and error. So when I did my first book, I hid it from the world because it was really meant for my child. And little did I know, like, it not only did it help her, it was picked up by a couple of family members that they're like, okay, this shouldn't be a DEY project. Like, this should be a real book because there's a really good content in here. So then I got a little smarter with it, got an illustrator. I had no idea how hard it was to hire an illustrator of color. Like, let me just be real. I had no idea how much self-publishing would cost me. And it's almost like an investment. Back then I would say it's at least $5,000 investment, because you need like an editor, you need a designer, you need an illustrator. Illustrator is going to want money, and it's learning some contracts. And this is why I'm being a little sheepish to say that it was a DEI project for me at first. So when transforming the book to an actual book that got featured in PBS, and it got featured in New York Cares for the fact that it showed culture in multiple ways, especially Little Maria Discovers Her Dance, Pequeña Maria Descubre Su Baile, because it hit on 5 things that a lot of Latine or Latinx books aren't doing. It's showing our mixture of what it is Latino and African American in a story through dance, and that's why it got featured. But before that, I was just a mom trying to make sure my daughter felt seen in the world, and I had no idea all the business side of publishing. And I think that's what it is for me. I had no idea how much research I had to do to get in the right space, to be seen with my colleagues as equals. Because let's get real, like, that's why a lot of self-publishing authors get a kind of like bad flag, like, your book is not well designed, it's not this, it's not that. But many of us kind of failed to do that research. So I did that the first. So for those who have failed to do the research, you're still in time. That's why we have 2nd editions, 3rd editions, 4th editions. If you get to 5th editions, just pick another book. But I'm sorry to be silly, but it's true. And I do want to encourage people that wherever you're starting at, just know that there's a place for you, because I'm that oddball that kind of found myself here,
And I just thank you so much, all of you, for your honesty and your transparency. I don't have experience in self-publishing. My route was strictly traditional publishing. And I think for me, the reason why I was like, I needed to be traditionally published was because I really wanted it to be available in like schools and libraries. And I always heard like, well, if you self-publish, it's not going to be picked up in those spaces. And so thank you all for sharing the like the process and being honest with knowing like it's never too late if you didn't do it the quote unquote like right way by doing all of the research ahead of time, which let's be honest, how many people start businesses and start initiatives not doing the research? A lot of us, right? It's never too late. And one thing, again, I know Luz personally, one thing I can say about Luz is you learn fast, you learn quick. So even though you didn't do the research from the beginning, your evolution as an author has really like showed your journey, and it's amazing. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to take an audience question. Mo wants to know, do you think it's a lot harder for BIPOC authors to get published, agents and editors not being able to relate to our characters, and stories being a top reason? So who wants to take that one first?
I'm just like,
yes, I would have to agree. Yeah,
I do think like for a long time, you know, that's been the case. Absolutely. I think that's probably why all three of us, that's one of the reasons I self-published initially, because I'd heard horror stories from other BIPOC authors. You know, oh, we already have, you know, we have one Black book, we have one Lebanese book, we can't have any more Middle Eastern, you know, authors this year. We've had one Latina, you know, like all of that stuff happened for a long time. And now in the past few years, you're seeing much more representation. So you're seeing a lot of agents and editors specifically saying, we want these stories. We have figured out that audiences want to read them. They're still working on how to get to those audiences, but you're seeing many, many more published. So it's easier than it has ever been before. You know, it still has a ways to go. But yeah, I definitely think that you're seeing many more calls, like the manuscript submission wish lists are looking for stories with BIPOC characters all across the genres.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a lot easier than it's ever been. It's not, you know, nearly as difficult as it may have been in the past. There has been a lot of progress made. And as far as agents and editors not being able to relate to your story, I think that's going to be an issue anytime you're dealing with someone who doesn't share your experience. So that's just the thing. Is more about having someone who's willing to understand, who's open to hearing why did this character do this, or why do they speak this way, or what do this mean, instead of just shutting it down. I think that's the difference. You're always going to encounter someone who doesn't share your experience. Maybe it's just because they're older than you or they're younger than you. And so that could be a barrier from them relating to your story. But as long as they're open and they're empathetic, and they respect the story that you're trying to tell, instead of just dismissing it as like not making sense or something like that. I think that's what's most important, is having someone who is, you know, empathetic and curious about your story and wants you to tell your story in your voice and as authentically as you can.
I'm so excited about this question for many reasons, because everything I have written has been like, I don't get it. Like, and my latest book that got picked up traditionally, which it was a blessing. And Alyssa, you and I spoke about this in many occasions, that to me, this was like an answered prayer and covered in my grandmother's blessing. But I'll answer this question with two things, echoing what my colleague said. It's true. Anyone that you're pitching a story that didn't grow up with you, that doesn't know you personally, that doesn't know your family or how you think, they're gonna have a tough time understanding it. I think what I've learned in my evolution of becoming a better writer, because I also struggle to say I'm an author, is that how can I explain my culture, my experience in the writing so simple that it welcomes others? And I think that's the challenge being BIPOC, is like we're trying to include someone into our world that might not necessarily have that point of reference, and our words are the point of reference that welcomes people. And one story that I self-published, that it's a children's book for older kids. I had an interesting mixed reviews from many publishers, and I'll share it with you. But it ultimately, everyone was like drawn to the story, and it was about a little boy being gifted a rooster, and being taught to be a man by teaching the rooster how to fight, like cockfights. And I was trying to talk about toxic masculinity within this story, and I centered it really about Caribbean culture and kind of like really drew the message about toxic masculinity. Everyone said, I really love this story, but I don't know how it will respond in traditional publishing. That was an answer to me that I heard from over 5 publishers. And that kind of told me, yes, we've done a lot of work that we have. We're hearing people of color, we're hearing people of different ethnicities and languages, but maybe we're not there yet for a lot of the different nuances and experiences to be shared in different capacities. So make sure when you're sharing your words and experience, that it also drives that message of what you want to share, and be prepared to hear maybe it's not the right time. It doesn't mean the story's not worth telling. That might not be your person. And that's kind of like my answer for that. Also, I just to finish the story, I ended up self-publishing that book that's being considered for something else. But part of self-publishing is learning through the story and learning and growing as an author.
Excellent. We have a lot of really amazing questions in the chat. So what you're all saying really resonates. The last thing I would say about this question, do your research, right? Like whether you are going to self-publish, clearly you have to do the research. If you're going to traditionally publish, you have to do the research, because otherwise you're going to end up in like a rejection cycle of pitching agents and editors that don't resonate with your work. So definitely make sure that you use tools like Query Tracker. You look at agents' manuscript wish lists, and if you see that they are prioritizing BIPOC stories, target those specific agents and make sure that you write a very specific, customized query letter. Agents can smell a like blanket email that you sent out to 100 agents, right? So while I think the difference now is we don't have to prove it as much to the industry that our communities read. The data is there. The data supports that our communities read. But while publishing houses and agents are becoming more open to bringing on BIPOC authors, the opportunities are still pretty narrow. Because agents can only bring on so many clients, and because editors can only bring on so many authors. So you have to make sure that your work really, really shines. And the only way to do that is by doing your research. So that is my rant. And with that, we're going to answer Jasmine's question. If you are self-published, is it hard to get your books into bookstores? It's a really good question.
I can start with this. By nature, it is more difficult if you self-publish to have your book in a physical bookstore. You can publish it on all of the online platforms, all the popular ones, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Thrift Books, wherever you shop online, all the major online booksellers, you can have it distributed through their network. But getting it into a physical bookstore, it is a bit more of a challenge. I think you spoke to this earlier when you said that's why you started with traditional publishing. It's not that I wanted to start as a traditional publisher. I'm with a traditional publisher. I just really didn't know how. Nothing like this space existed to help me understand what I needed to do to get it into traditional publishing. So I just started with self-publishing because it was, easier access. But that is something to think about. If you want your book sitting in a physical bookstore on a shelf, it is more difficult. It's not impossible. It's just a bit more of a challenge. You have to create your own, it's called a one sheet, where you have information about the book. You just have to do a lot of the lead work and maybe even physically go to some of the bookstores and talk to the buyers and try to sell them on stocking your book. It's possible. It is just a little more challenging.
Yeah, it does require, you can do it very easily locally, visit your local independent bookstores and get them in there. As far as something like a Barnes & Noble, that's going to be extremely difficult because even now they're shrinking the shelf space. My books, some of my self-pub books are in my local Barnes & Noble because I've done events there. And because my books are available on Ingram, which distributes to the major distributors, which, is another thing that you have to do, because bookstores will not buy from Amazon. So
Yeah.
you need to put your books on Ingram, Sutherland, Baker and Taylor. There's two main distributors that a bookstore can order from. And so since I do events, you know, they will order my books and then they will be there. But if I'm not going around contacting them, going in, you know, I have another author friend who just keeps a huge database of independent bookstores all across the country, and either her or her assistant contacts them. So it is a lot of legwork, and it's, you know, for me, it's diminishing rewards. Like I don't do that work. I don't have the time for that for my self-published stuff. You know, as long as it's available everywhere digitally, I'm happy with that. But if it's really important to you, then just be prepared.
No, I agree. First, I didn't have the opportunity to have my books in bookstores. The only bookstore that I knew was going to be a welcoming space was Word Up, which is in Washington Heights here in New York City. And by virtue, my first book reading was at Word Up. And when I got published traditionally, like they did a huge party because they knew how hard I was working. And we're talking about like 10 years of legwork, right? They also carry all my self-published work. And one of the great things is because finding a space like Word Up, which is a community bookstore that does more than just books, it's also provides a community space for the Washington Heights neighborhood. I got welcomed to other spaces. And I did a lot of the legwork, going to bookstores near me, going to Barnes and Noble. But I kind of stopped because it was kind of like, it was really, what's the word I'm looking for? I felt like a salesperson. And I know as an author, you become a salesperson. Like, this is my book, this is the benefit, this is the age group. And it's almost like you're like pitching nonstop. But it got to a point that I was like, is this what I want to do? Or do I want to spend my time writing? So I focused some time just dedicating to trying to get my book in different spaces and the other in writing, because that's really where I want to conserve a lot of my energy for. So yes, my books now, even my self-published, are in some bookstores, not all. It even got to Target, in some books shelves at Target, which is hard. Not a lot of self-published authors get at Target, but I also did something that many self-published authors don't do. And I'll share this. I did Instagram filter, and I also did an animation. So when the book started getting love in a digital end, it kind of begged for the book. So in this market and in this economy, you have to realize, where is my audience at? And we are more heading to that space. That's why you hear about audiobooks and things like that. So don't only think about getting the books in these coveted shelf space, since, you know, there's not a lot of Barnes and Nobles. There's not a lot of book spaces to hold all the amazing books. Just think about other individuals that will benefit from your book. And one of the reasons I animated was because I wanted to get my books to my country. And in my country, there's not a lot of money. And that was it. Just trying to make sure I share that message.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that too. It's nice to see your book in a bookstore on a shelf. So I don't want to discredit that and say it doesn't matter, because it feels good to see your book there. And also, bookstores are making a comeback, especially independent bookstores where people are physically going into stores. But there are even traditionally published books by well-known authors who aren't on bookshelves in stores that I've had to order online and had to, go and pick it up once it came in. So there is limited space. And then the digital age is not as important as it used to be. So I would say don't let that discourage you or make you feel like I have to go this route so I can be in a bookstore, because you can have a very successful book even without it being on a physical shelf. And like I said, also well-known authors with well-known books still may not even be on those shelves. So there's no guarantee no matter which route you go.
Thank you so much for saying that, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Like, even traditionally published authors are not necessarily featured in every single bookstore, right? So one thing that we do here at The Word is we have something called Margins Bookselling Month, and we highlight bookstores owned by our community, right? We highlight bookstores that are BIPOC owned, that are LGBTQIA2S+ owned, that are disabled owned, that are neurodiverse owned and managed, to all of those, because these are the places where you can find our books, whether you're self-published or even traditionally published. My book that came out, Platanos Are Love, got a really teeny tiny order from Barnes and Nobles, traditionally published, but independent bookstores showed up for me, you know? So you have to know where to find your audience. And that's one of the challenges, whether you're self-published or traditionally published, because even in the traditionally published space, a lot of editors and publicists and marketing agents, they haven't targeted our audience before, so they don't know how to do it effectively in a lot of ways. So yes, thank you for sharing that. Like, don't automatically think that just because you're traditionally published, your book is going to end up in every bookstore. It is not. um, and to just make sure that we answer Jasmina's question completely, the distributor is Ingram. If you go to an independent bookstore and you send them your Amazon link, they're not going to buy your book off Amazon because they're not going to make any money that way. But if your book is available through Ingram, then they can order it and they can make money, which is important to them as businesses. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next question. Khadija asks, can anyone address how BIPOC creatives do or don't get supported by the publishing professionals for their long-term success? And I feel like we started meandering in this direction, so this question is very timely. Anyone can address it first.
I've been very lucky that I've been at two different traditional houses, big five houses with Black women editors. And so that's been a really good experience. But I think it's across the board. You know, I think that every author has issues getting the support that they want from traditional publishing. If you think about an editor at one of these houses, they work so many hours. Like, you know, they have so many duties other than editing your book. They're acquiring, they're in sales meetings. You know, I know my editor reads at night and on the weekends. She actually just reads the manuscripts. You think that's their whole job. That's not their whole job. That's a tiny part of their job. So I don't know that you should support. I mean, that you should expect this support from them. Your agent is really there to support you if you have an agent for your long-term success. That's kind of their job. And an editor will kind of pay lip service, like, oh, we want a long relationship with you, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, that can, you know, take it with a grain of salt because there's a lot else going on. So I think that you should put in place communities to help you do that. You know, having a community of other writers, whether it's a critique group, or I have a mastermind that I started with other authors, and we meet every week and we discuss our business and creative challenges. Put that into place for yourself, because I don't think expecting it from them is going to be very realistic, you know.
Yeah, I agree. It's across the board depending on where you go, especially if you go to a large publishing house, even if you have, you know, someone from your demographic as your editor and publishing your book, they still have many other clients, they still have many other jobs. I think of a writer, Hanif Abdul Rakib. He's, you know, super popular. He's been blowing up, and he just took on an editing position with Tin House. But still, he's a very busy writer. He has his own writing to do. He has his own events to attend. So while he may be your editor, he's gonna, I'm sure he gives it the attention, you know, and care as much as he can. But you do have to understand that no one is going to be able to be 100% focused on you all of the time for your entire career. So I think, like Leslye said, it's about finding people who you feel have your best interest at heart. You want them to be accessible, of course. You want to feel like they care about you and your writing, of course, but you can't expect anyone to be able to just, you know, hold your hand through the entire process. A lot of it you're going to have to do yourself. I know a writer who was published by like Penguin Random House, a huge house, and she thought she was just going to sit back and they were going to do everything. And it was like, no, we have a bunch of other clients who are going to, you know, put you out there and market you as best we can, but you also still have to do some of that work. You don't get out of doing the work yourself either.
Agree with everyone. I think that one of the things that helped me since I was self-published is that I had no choice but to depend on me for posting information about my book, sharing it with my internal community. And when I'm saying internal community, it expands between family, friends, and schools. I had to do the research of where are the literary spaces where I'm expecting support, and make sure my ask is clear. Because as a creative myself, I want to make sure that the support is tangible. So I would go to spaces saying, like, for example, I will go to a school and I'll tell a school, hey, I have this book. I would love to showcase it to your second or first or second grade. And if they tell me no, okay, can you at least consider holding the book in your library space? That's the support. That's a realistic support that I could get a yes or no. So for publishing professionals, it's different, right? Because now that I've been published traditionally with my latest book, I thought my book was going to be accessible to every school, and it's not. So knowing that, that means that it is you, right? So what I concentrated on the schools that my children attended, and then I kind of expanded out. Also, another research that needed to be done on my end, and this is very much on my end, is that New York City public schools and Washington, D.C. public schools and Texas public schools and Miami public schools all have different, beautiful, convoluted processes that are determined by what we call librarian curriculum. So we need to know, what is it that our kids are learning? Back then, we used to be focused on when the kid is in first grade or second grade is learning their sight words, which are like the first 100 words. So you had to be very good at selling your book. My words had this many sight words. Like, this is why you want this book. And I know that sounds very kind of like, okay, you're giving me too much information. But imagine a publisher now has all these amazing authors and has this extensive catalog. They do have access to school systems, but not every school systems. The school systems really don't work with publishers unless, like New York City, for example, they have an in-house publisher. I discovered that like 6 months ago. So for people that are in the children's book space, that's something that we should kind of like talk about, right? So that's one level of support that many kid book writers will love, that their books is accessible in the school space. But that's kind of hard. And then the other level of support that I know was a big shock to me was the marketing piece. I think the most realistic approach is like, how will my book be rolled out in the first 6 months that it's out? And how will my book be celebrated when it hits a birthday? And how will my book be featured in certain months? And I'll give you an example. My book, The Secret of the Plátano, El Secreto del Plátano, was only featured in Hispanic Heritage Month, me being Hispanic of Dominican descent and Dominican, right? But also it was featured in like, what's it called? I'm sorry, I'm thinking in Spanish. Earth Day, so, or for Caribbean celebration, right? Month here. And so those are 3 different holidays that I knew I could receive that support. But outside of that, that was me being like, hey, Christmas is coming. Make sure you share my book. So we kind of need to break down the types of support we could expect from ourselves, from our groups, and then from publishers. And that's the way I've been approaching it.
Awesome. It's also why organizations like The Word exist, right?
Yeah.
They're we work with authors, we work with writers, we have the mentorship program that pairs aspiring authors and agented authors, published authors, through a mentorship program that they get to work with an editor. It's why we work with bookstores, specifically Margins bookstores. It's why we host panels like this, because in my opinion, and in the opinion of The Words, we don't get as much support. So we had to create these communities for ourselves. And so, Leslye, what you did and create that mastermind, that's beautiful. That's amazing. I'm also part of Kidlit in Color and Las Musas, which are communities of authors. And we work with each other to help each other promote our books, because we're not always getting that support from the publishing industry, because they have too many clients sometimes. So yes, definitely take a look at all of our programs, learn more about what we offer, because we work with everyone in different ways that make sense to the specific communities that we work with. Okay, we have 10 minutes left, and we have 2 more really great questions in the chat. So if everyone can just kind of like condense their answer and give like the Spark Notes version, that would be amazing, so we can get to both questions. Bridget, I'm not even going to read it. You guys can read it and just jump on in. Let's talk about what specific research you had to do.
I'll just say quickly, for research, whether you're trad or indie, reading books that are from authors of your background, seeing if they're agented, who agented them, who published them, who do they talk about in their acknowledgments. If you're self-publishing, I found lots of editors, indie editors and indie cover designers, through looking at acknowledgments, through researching the books that exist. And yeah, everything's online. We mentioned Query Tracker before. Publishers Marketplace is a paid website that has all of the traditional pay for a few months to get that research of who's publishing what the deals are. You can get information about the industry that way. And
Yeah, I agree. Just research whatever is important to you. It's not like you have to sit and pour through loads of information that doesn't matter to you. But if something is important, whether that's having a woman as your agent or editor, or what types of books this publishing house has put out before, I'll go and look at previous releases and see how well they did. Like, that's interesting to me. So just figure out, your top things that are important when making your decisions, and research those things.
For me, like everyone said, that's important to research. Another thing that's important to research is whatever book I'm writing about, and I'll keep it simple. Like if it's a bath book, if I have 2 specific houses that I'm looking at, I need to see what other bath books that they put out there, so I'm not competing with an author that they have in place. And that's what I'm using, like an example of a bath book. Like, for example, if they're already representing an author that has a bath book, maybe my book needs to have a unique twist to it. It can't be Bath Time with Baby, because probably that title is already taken. I have to really research everything about it, content-wise, developmentally wise, because my book needs to stand out. So that's another aspect of research that I focus a lot when giving advice to others, and even taking that same advice. And I remember I had a student ask me once, "Oh, I want to do a book about this with this house," and they were very specific. And I'm like, that book kind of exists. They already picked an author. And they're like, "Well, how do you know?" And I'm like, okay. I had to like break it down in a way like, who saw the movie of like Cannibal, like the cannibal person who eats people? I'm like, Netflix had a movie about cannibal. Then months later, Hulu had a different take of Hannibal.
Jeffrey Dahmer?
That one, the Jeffrey Dahmer. So there was a Jeffrey Dahmer show on Netflix. Then Hulu had a Jeffrey Dahmer documentary, and HBO had another Jeffrey Dahmer. We can't have all Jeffrey Dahmers on one platform. That's what I said to them. And as soon as I said that, they're like, I got it.
Perfect. So yes, we have to do the research when we're writing. We have to do the research when you're deciding which pathway you're going to go down, whether it's self or traditionally published. We have to do the research of agents if you want to do traditionally publish. And definitely, if you are self-publishing, do the research on how to get on Ingram Spark, because that is how you can get your books more widely distributed. So in every step of the way, there is a research component. A good place to start, I did put it in the chat, but I'll share it here, is we have a resources page on our website. So definitely check that out. All right, we have our last question. We're almost there. You guys are amazing, seriously. Oh no, we have 2 more questions. We'll see if we can get to the very last one. But here, how can you distinguish whether rejections are predominantly occurring because the margins for entry is still narrow for BIPOC, or because the work itself may need substantial revision?
I think you can You can ask, number one, if you get a rejection, maybe ask for a thoughtful response and say, ask what the reason was. And if you do need substantial revisions, or if the writing they feel isn't up to par, most will tell you that. If they take the time to respond to you, they'll usually follow up with any additional information they can provide if you ask. It's difficult to know. No one's gonna come right out and say anything that's controversial or that could paint them in a bad light. But if you just ask, like, what did you think about the work, or could you give me more insight into why? I think most, like I said, if they took the time to respond to you, because that's another thing, not all agents or publishers or anyone, you may not even get a response. So if someone takes the time to respond to you, maybe just follow up and ask for more information on why they rejected it, if they rejected it. And they should be, most of them I found will be forthcoming with more information that will help you determine what you need to do, or if you need to work on your manuscript a little more.
Yeah, I would say that, if you get a response, that's amazing, because it doesn't happen very often. If you have beta readers or critique partners, you really, I mean, obviously you're putting forth your best work. You're not giving your first draft. You're not submitting that. So if multiple people have read it, and people that you trust, people who read a lot and can, they don't have to be professional editors necessarily, but they do have to be able to say more than, oh, I loved it, like give some reasons. So you're putting it through its paces. But a lot of times a rejection based on, they know that they can't say, oh, I can't relate to this anymore. So they might couch it in, the craft is not up to par. And that's going to be subjective. So does that mean your craft isn't really up to par, or they couldn't relate to your brown people heroine or hero? You're not going to know, really. So just do everything that you can do to make sure that your craft is the best that it can be. And it's always going to be improving. Like, I've been publishing a long time. I'm still working on craft. And keep submitting. If you get rejected, at that point, it doesn't matter. Somebody, if it's meant to be published, someone will love it, and you can always self-publish it. And even like books with poor craft, if the heart is there, readers are forgiving. Like, we all know 50 Shades of Grey was a juggernaut and the craft was not amazing, but something in those books people loved. They looked past all the craft issues. So there's that too.
Perfect. And just for the sake of time, the last question, because this is a really good one. Before you all jump in, I do want to share that we will be having our next writing path session is going to be talking all about marketing. So I hope to see you there, Jasmina. We are actually going to have a panel featuring publicists and marketing professionals. And it's basically like a mini boot camp for writers on what you need to know in order to publish your book, and the marketing stuff that you need to do. So we'll definitely hear from the authors on this last question, but definitely sign up for that next one. It's most likely going to be in November. So stay tuned for our workshops, because we're going to be talking a lot more about publishing this year and in the coming year. All right. Any last minute suggestions on how you can market your self-published books?
I did a lot. That's a lot of reason why, but it paid off. That's why it did so well. And Publishers Weekly, reviewed it, and now it was featured in Cosmopolitan and all of these things. You have to put a lot into it if you want, those types of results. So I put a lot into it financially, energy wise. I hired a publicist, a professional publicist. I submitted it to a bunch of book awards. I submitted it to Publishers Weekly for review. You have to do all of those things yourself. You just have to put yourself out there and try to take advantage of as many opportunities as you can. And it's the law of averages. If you put it out there in enough spaces, some of them are going to respond. But the biggest thing I did was hire a publicist, and it wasn't cheap. Completely transparent. It was $10,000. But that's how I got placed in Cosmopolitan and Bustle and all of these different places. So yeah.
I would just add that using pricing, so sales, running sales. I wouldn't say all of your books have to be 99 cents, but if you're in Kindle Unlimited, or even if you're on wide and all the distributors, you can use pricing. There are all of these newsletters, email newsletters that you advertise sales to. So you've heard of BookBub. That's very expensive, but there's a lot of other ones. There's something called promo stacking. So when you run a sale, you buy ads in a lot of these newsletters that go out to readers, and hopefully you have more books that they can buy afterwards so you can make more money, but it gets it in the hands of lots and lots of readers. And then, posting on Facebook groups for readers, running, Amazon advertising, Facebook advertising, these things cost money too. There's also group promos. You should have a newsletter. You should have an author newsletter even before you publish anything. And then you can do newsletter swaps, which means another author says, oh, this person has a book, and then you promote your book in their newsletter. Even if you only have a few readers, you're introducing your book to people who don't know it before. So there are websites like Story Origin and BookFunnel, I will try to put those in the chat, that allow you to do the newsletter swaps. And those are other kind of low cost or, cheaper things that you can do that can help you get the word out.
So many good gems in there, loose.
My biggest marketing trade, and I know you know this, Alyssa, is I become friends with people on Facebook, on LinkedIn, or Instagram that I really want to be friends with. And I make sure that their titles are newscast or news reporter. And I've become very, very good friends with a lot of them. But besides that, you could also sign up for something called Help a Reporter Out. Harrow, I think it is. It's a good one. Sometimes they do ask for books, not very, but it's a very slim chance. But also knowing to network up and network across is really important. To me, that's been how I've gotten a lot of my work across. And that's how I even got featured on PBS, just becoming friends with people and letting them know about my work. Don't be afraid to share your work, even with someone on the bus.
Oh my goodness. We're going to have to do a 2.0 because I had all these questions lined up talking about the money and the cost, and I was going to get in. We were going to peel back that curtain, but I literally had no time to ask any of my own questions because you were all super engaged and had amazing questions. So we're going to figure out how we can do a 2.0 for this, and then also definitely stay tuned for our marketing writing pathways that's going to happen in November. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank you to our amazing panelists. We appreciate you and are so grateful that you got to spend time with us today. For writers, booksellers, and book lovers in the room, we have many resources, which I shared in the chat, for you to be sure to visit. So if you have any questions, feel free to also email us at info@thewordfordiversity.org. I'm going to pop that in the chat as well. I am also going to share a form because we want to hear from you as I continue to work on these writing pathways workshops. We want to hear from you what you want to hear from us. This panel came out because people were curious. They wanted to know, they're like, ooh, I don't know. Should I self-publish? Should I not? Should I traditionally publish? Should I not? And that's why we're delivering this for you now. We saw there's a lot of interest in learning about marketing. So that's why we're doing that. Yes, 2.0. Okay, see, we're listening. We listen to our community here at The Word. So please fill out that form so that we know what you're interested in, because all of our programs are built collectively with our community. We also cannot run these programs without our community support. We are committing to ensuring that these events remain free and accessible. So if you are able, please donate and support The Word. We also pay our panelists, not a ton, because we're a nonprofit, but there are so many organizations out there that do not pay for our panelists for events like this. So please contribute and donate if you are financially able. Thank you for being in community with us at The Word. We hope to see you again soon. Bye.